Hello, everybody. Welcome to the latest Forward Trust Chief Executive's vlog. It's Mike Trace here. I'm the Chief Executive of Forward Trust. Welcome again. What I thought I'd talk about today, I have talked over the months about specific policies that are related to Forward Trust services, things like prisons, employment, addiction, welfare policy. Today, I think I'll talk about policy in a bit of a more abstract sense, and that's been triggered by the publication of Sadiq Khan's review into drug laws, drug policy around legalization and issues like that. He's commissioned a group of people under Charlie Faulkner, Lord Faulkner, who was part of the previous Tony Blair government, who used to work with him there, to look into what the Greater London Mayor's view is of drug laws and drug enforcement. And they produced their report, which fundamentally, I'll summarize a long report saying that the big recommendation is that cannabis should be decriminalized, not legalized, and I'll describe that distinction in a minute, but basically the idea that there should be changes to the law around cannabis. Now, we know that Sadiq Khan and Charlie Faulkner have both made positive comments in the past about drug law reform, trying to particularly position cannabis as being less strongly punished. So it's no great surprise that they've asked for this commission and they've come out with a recommendation for, to a certain extent, a liberalisation under the law. The specific recommendation is that cannabis should be moved out of the Misuse of Drugs Act, 1971, and put into the Psychoactive Substances Act of 2016, and that would achieve the objective of the commission, which would be that possession of cannabis would not be a criminal offence. Dealing, supplying, importing would remain offences, but possession would be not a criminal offence at all. There is a great distinction between that and legalisation. Legalisation is the creation of a legal market like we have for alcohol at the moment. There is obviously legal controls and licensing and taxing around alcohol, and legalisation of drugs, cannabis or any others, would mean creating a legal market where the supply was regulated and like as we know with alcohol suppliers, off licenses, pubs, but that is not what is being recommended. That has been pursued in a few countries around the world, but this commission and certainly the government position at the moment is not to go in that direction in the UK. So this latest recommendation from this commission that moving cannabis around in the legal framework, I think is another example of the legal mess that we've got in with cannabis and other drugs. We have a very complicated, very old piece of legislation, the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act. There's been various amendments to that over the years. They downgraded cannabis in the early 2000s and upgraded it again in 2009. They brought in the new Psychoactive Substances Act, which works in parallel with the Misuse of Drugs Act, but crosses over in some ways. And of course, these acts all have very strong maximum sentences for infringements of the act. You can get life imprisonment for being involved in Class A drugs. But of course, those sentences are never passed down. So particularly with cannabis, you look, there are millions of people in the country use cannabis. The vast majority of them never get any attention from law enforcement at all. But if they do get attention, they don't get prison sentences for possession, very rarely, and very unfortunately for those people involved. And they certainly don't use anything like the maximum powers available, which is 7 or 14 years imprisonment. You get some heavy sentences for supply and cultivation offences, but generally around the possession, the prison sentences are non-existent or not very long. So it's very messy. The whole system is very messy, and within that messiness, anything in the criminal justice system, there's a lot of injustice. Some people get a short prison sentence for things other people are let off for. Different parts of the country have different strengths of enforcement. And I think that's my main response when everybody debates or a commission suggests something around the drug laws. Basically, at best, if they're not going to legalize drugs, then at best they're really tinkering around the edges with scheduling and what substance is placed where. What really matters on the ground is what the police do. What is police practice in your area? And as I said, for most people who use cannabis and to some extent other drugs as well, most people are not going to get attention from the police. It is a truism that mainly because those people who are using drugs who are middle class and well off and, can do it in their own homes, buy it online, all that sort of thing, you're not going to get much attention from the police. But if you're using drugs on the streets and in very visible ways, then you are going to come across police, and that's when you find out whether your local police force is a broadly liberal one or a tough one. And we have to say the trend over the last 20 years at least is that police forces have become less harsh in their arrest procedures and their sentencing or their prosecuting of people who are arrested for cannabis use. So the vast majority of people who do even get arrested may get taken back to a police station. They'll get caution or a community resolution. Now that's not nothing. That can lead to a criminal record, and it also can affect all sorts of areas of life and can be expensive. There are fines attached quite often. There are breach proceedings. So this doesn't mean that there is no action, as there would be the case under decriminalisation. But there is very little use of imprisonment or harsh community penalties around possession. That's been the trend. Most police forces have schemes that divert people away from any great criminal justice process. But those schemes are variable around the country. Some police forces divert everybody they come across. Other police forces much lower percentages. So there's a postcode lottery. But there's one aspect of this police enforcing the drug laws that doesn't get talked about a lot, but I think is the most influential when policy decisions are being made. When I was in government back in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a publication of something called the Runciman Report, which recommended decriminalisation of cannabis. And that was talked about in government. I was in the rooms, and one of the main arguments against it came from police management. And basically, that argument was saying that having the ability to stop, search, arrest, intervene with people around cannabis use was a very useful tactic for the police to target what they would have called then, and I heard it mentioned recently, what they target wrong-uns. So I call that the Al Capone theory. Those who don't know the story, Al Capone, notorious gangster, bad guy in 1930s America, they never got him for all the violence and racketeering he was involved in. They got him on tax evasion. So we call the Al Capone theory the idea that you can't arrest and charge and find evidence for somebody on the bad stuff they're doing. So you catch them on a technicality and you exert control over them. And that has, and I've seen it myself over the decades, is that has infused police practice around cannabis enforcement. It's quite often a cannabis reason for search, a cannabis stop and search, or a cannabis intervention or raid or search or arrest is used as a pretext to get somebody who they want to get for other offences, which is harder to amass the evidence around. And that is, I think we have to be honest, and I think that is a definite part of the reality of policing on the ground. And I did see it presented. I'm afraid I can't point to the article, but I read an article a couple of weeks ago in response to the Charlie Faulkner review, which was honest about that. It was a retired policeman who's now doing journalism work and was saying, we know who the wrong uns are. We can't always arrest them for what we want to arrest them for. So having the ability to arrest and charge somebody on a cannabis possession is the best way to get the wrong uns off the street. Now that's honest. That's real world. That's what happens out there. And I do think there needs to be more acknowledgement that is one of the reasons why police forces would be nervous about losing those cannabis enforcement powers. But I've got to say, I'm not sure that is the way we should be writing our laws. To say, right, well, we want to retain the power for the police to use their discretion to decide who's a wrong un and decide to go after them under the cannabis laws as opposed to any other laws. I think I can understand operationally why that is a handy power for police to have, but I don't think we should design in our laws in order to achieve the Al Capone theory. So that debate will roll and roll. There are lots of people who have got very good arguments to say that why decriminalisation should happen. I'm broadly in favour of decriminalisation myself. I don't think we should be arresting 100,000 people for doing something that millions of others do, and most of them not causing any harm to others. But the operational debate will run and run. Is this a power that the police, it's good for the police to have to save us from other forms of crime? The other interesting aspect of the response to the Sadiq Khan, Charlie Faulkner report is how muted the government has been about it. So quite rightly, people have criticised this commission to say, well, they're talking about changes in the law, but the London mayor has no powers over the law. This is a national government power. But the national government have just trotted out the line that has been trotted out for many years now, which is we have no plans to change the legislation or to decriminalise cannabis. Which is true, they have no plans, but it's not really engaging with the issue and trying to resolve this decades-long dilemma. And I think that is a sign of where the government's at with its broader drug strategy. As you know, I was involved in writing and overseeing government drug strategies 20 odd years ago, and I know how complex and difficult it is. But we are in a period where the government doesn't have in its high priorities to achieve significant change around drug strategy. But it does have priorities about health inequalities and priorities around reducing drug-related deaths, priorities around reducing drug-related crime and antisocial behaviour associated with drug markets. But it has been relatively muted so far. It's nearly a year in this government. They've been relatively muted about, are we going to do anything new, bring any new initiatives? Are we going to break with the direction of the 10-year strategy agreed under the Conservatives? We do know that the Labour government do intend to publish a refresh of the 10-year strategy, and that is a sensible thing to do. But the general mood around that refresh, as far as I can ascertain, is one of complacency is an unfair word because there's an awful lot of good work going on, but there's not a feeling of real energy to say, right, we're going to revise this strategy, we're going to bring in new ideas, we're going to run with new initiatives. And that I think is a shame because we still do have a very terrible situation out on the streets, particularly around drug-related deaths. They're going up, lots more people dying as a result of drug and alcohol use. We do have a continuing drug-related crime challenge, which really matters in communities, the way drug markets operate, the impact on antisocial behaviour, the impact on communities. You hear a lot about county lines, but there's an awful lot of victims within that drug dealing model. All these things are carrying on and if anything getting worse. And I do feel that we do need to hear more from government to say, right, we're going to intervene in this and we're going to make a big difference. But we're not hearing those messages at the moment. Obviously, the main discussion is one we've discussed on these vlogs before, is that the Ministry of Justice, James Timpson, has got big ideas around better rehabilitation for people in prison or around the criminal justice system, and that's great, and we hope to see that come to fruition. But that is just one part of a wider job of responding to the drug markets in our country, and we do need to see a bit more urgency around coming from the Department of Health and the Home Office. That's my hope. That's what I'll push for, and hopefully we see some of that in the coming year. Anyway, thanks for your attention for this. Hope you found it interesting.